Hello and welcome back to YuriCon 2023. I have a very exciting panel today. I'm going to be talking about Yuri's past, present, and future with the Holy Mother of Yuri herself. So everybody welcome Yurimother, and why don't you give yourself a quick self-intro and we'll move on from there.
Sure. So hi, I am Nicki Bauman, more commonly known as the Holy Mother of Yuri or just Yurimother. I'm a Yuri writer, researcher, connoisseur, journalist,
Enthusiast,
content creator, enthusiast, general Yuri Jin, who does a lot of work with Yuri and gets to engage with it a lot in really exciting ways.
Yeah, and you have a really popular TikTok and your blog and a Patreon. So all those things are great ways for people to engage with you, and I definitely encourage people to look up Yurimother and read her reviews and her articles. It's great stuff. And while you are a newbie by my standards, you've actually been around for a while. So why don't we start with, how did you get into Yuri?
Sure. So I got into Yuri. It was like, I want to say maybe 2010, could be 2009, 2011, somewhere around that range. My brother and I was a young teenager at the time. We were in my mom's office working, ironically, at she worked at a church. And so he says, oh, I have this anime to show you. And I just sort of recently gotten into anime. The first anime I saw, other than Pokemon, the first anime I saw, that I understood was, oh, this is an anime, was Strawberry Marshmallow, which turns out, you look at it, it's like, oh, there's a lot of Yuri elements there. But my brother showed me Strawberry Panic, which is quite the series, of course, as we both know. Yes. But I was totally just enthralled by it. I thought, oh my gosh, I've never seen something like this before. This is amazing. This is incredible. I want to know more about it. I want to get, really into this. And around this time, I was also getting into Tumblr, which is, this is sort of where a lot of nerd culture and fandom was back in that time.
Like the
and so I started.
We're talking about 2006, 2007, around that period.
Yeah, little after that for me. I was a couple of years after, but yeah. I think probably at the earliest 2008. I'm trying to remember ages. I think I must have been in 5th or 6th grade. So that would have been 2010, 2009.
You were a little baby.
Yeah, no, really. I mean, just, I say I grew up Yuri Jin.
You sure did.
So I started a Tumblr dedicated to Strawberry Panic, and I just got more and more into Yuri, and I started noticing all these different patterns whenever I would consume work, which there wasn't a lot of back then. I mean, we had a couple anime series, Maria Sama ga Mitaru. You had Revolutionary Girl Utena, some seasons of Sailor Moon.
2003-4 one. Yeah, I mean, it was like every few years we got like one big one back then.
Yeah.
It's like sort of the thing that happened like every other year. And for some reason, it kept being odd numbered years, which was just really strange. Like all the way through like 2012, it was just always odd numbered years. We get like one big series every like other year.
Yeah, and if it was a dud one, it was like, oh man, really? Kanazuku no Miko is the best we got.
Right. It had moments, but at the end it was like, oh, okay, that didn't end.
Love the ending theme though.
Yeah,
that song.
The music is great. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Honestly, my anime music is a long history of anime I no longer care about, but I still like the music. It's like an endless series of, oh yeah, I remember that anime.
I have the soundtrack from Frag Time, which I thought was awful, but the soundtrack was beautiful. But my God, what a terrible
it's
product.
Not my favorite either.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I was why this one? Anyway, we'll get into that.
We'll get into that.
So yeah, so that's how I got into Yuri, and I just got more and more into the fandom of it. And around 2016 or so this is years later, I moved over from sort of more of a fandom blog with pictures and fan posts to more of the journalistic side. I started doing and publishing research and writing about Yuri, trying to dive into that niche of going in depth into stories about what Yuri anime or manga are coming out, what Yuri visual novels are there, getting to interview some different Yuri creators. Really, really great stuff. And then I started TikTok in 20 21, I think. I was a little late on the board with that. Which has, I think the community on TikTok is very different. It is a younger audience for sure, which, you know, I'm young, but I think a lot of the Yuri region there are younger and certainly didn't grow up with Yuri in the way I did. I think a lot of them got in with Bloomington and the rise of webtoons and webcomics. So there's a lot of kind of changes I see in the fandom there versus the fandom that I've known and been a part of for over a decade now.
Right. And I have you know, I was sort of like one of the parents of Yuri, you know, I was like 10 years earlier than that, sort of shepherding it into existence. And so when the big boom came with Bloomington, when people were like, oh, this is like a classic. And you're like, actually, no, but yes, but no. And all the reasons that, you know, you think this is amazing. It's not that it hasn't been done, but it's really done well. This one sort of in some ways, in other ways it wasn't, you know. And it's interesting to me that every new big series brings with it like a whole new wave of people who are like, I've never experienced this, and this is the first one that ever happened because this is the first one I ever experienced, you know. And I'm fascinated by that continuing trend.
The Bloomington, like, oh my gosh, it's the greatest series ever. I wrote an article for, I think, Anime News Network saying, well, actually, this is all stuff we've seen before. You know, and it's done well. And ultimately, I'm just gonna I sort of railed against it a little bit of like, this is very tropey and typical, but then had to qualify that with, but if you love it, that's amazing. If it's what got you into Yuri or helped you understand something, and to give Bloomington some credit, it does have it twists a lot of the tropes, I think, especially when you get into the later part of the series.
I think it took a long time to get to that point. I mean, that beginning, particularly in the manga, it sets itself up for some failure, and it definitely does fail on some accounts. But I do think for a new generation who was looking for that big series that said, yes, queerness exists, I think it was the right time and the right place.
Oh, it's certainly a much better gateway series to point someone to than Citrus or Strawberry Panic, for sure.
Well, Strawberry Panic to me, it was actually, and I'm going to say this because I wrote nothing but hate posts for years, but
I'm aware. I've read them. I love them.
But the thing is, in the end, I came around to it because what it was the anime. Let's talk about the anime.
Sure.
It was a giant songfic. You know, it was a huge, nothing but references to other things. Like they literally said, which series are we going to steal from this week? And then they went and took a key piece and then integrated it into this much bigger picture. And they actually stuck the landing on that, which, you know, I don't think too many other anime do. I think if I have a specific complaint about anime as a whole, it's the landings, the endings, you know, they're always like, and then it all resets and we start over again, you know. I think that Strawberry Panic was really very, very, very derivative, but it was so derivative of so many things. They actually managed to make something out of it. And particularly, again, back in 2007, if you didn't know, you would know. You had literally no idea. So you were like, oh my God, this is the coolest stuff. And I'm like, and it's from here, and it's from here, and it's from here, and it's from here.
Right. And so having that as my intro allowed me to see, you know, when I started going back and looking at some of the work that it had stolen from, or some of the work that repeated a lot of those tropes.
Homage. It's homage.
Sorry. Yes.
When there's money involved,
that
it's
it was inspired by, that it drew from creatively. I mean, Yuri is just repeating trope after trope after trope so much until really, I would say we only start to get out of that in the past couple of years, and still, you know.
And the thing is, anime as a whole has its own tropes. So like, I'm just going to jump real quick. We have something like Gundam, which for Mercury, which was fantastic, but Gundam has its own set of tropes. It's got this whole body of stuff. And if you watched it, you might go, well, this was, if you watched it and having never watched a Gundam, never heard of Gundam, you'd be like,
which is how I watched it. I've never seen Gundam.
But if you were me, you know, you're watching it and going, this is so Gundam. This is like 100% Gundam with like the Utena homage at the beginning.
Oh my gosh. I forgot about that. The first episode was just
Utena. It
was wild. I was so excited when I saw them, like, they're doing Gundam, but Utena.
Yeah. Also, today I went to go on to the Bandai Namco shop just to see if they had any Birdie Wing t-shirts left. They do not. But when you search Birdie Wing at the Bandai Namco site, you get G-Witch, which confirms for me that after all, what we knew is that Birdie Wing is in fact an AU of Gundam, which we all kind of guessed. To me, that's like, it's now proven because that's what happened. So
Yeah. Oh my bird. Talk about wild series that do something different.
Different, but also stuff. I mean, there's tons of stuff from shonen and shoujo sports anime.
Oh,
I haven't done a video of it. It's something I have to sit down and do, but there's so much. I'm actually overwhelmed by the attempt.
yeah,
I'm
same.
talking about writing. There's just so much.
I want to write like just an article breaking down, here's where this trope is from. Here's this thing, because it does it all so well.
Right.
Oh my gosh, I love
there's just so much of it, so yeah, well, welcome to the world of Yuri 10 years later and 20 years later, and I'm glad when you started writing, I was super excited because I could see somebody else was out there doing the same kinds of things I was doing, but differently. And it's important to have different voices, and your perspective as a younger person, from my perspective, meant that you were bringing the level of enthusiasm about stuff that you were just discovering, where I'm going, yeah, it's whatever. And I'm always trying to be enthusiastic about new things. And sometimes it gets harder than others. There are days.
Oh, sure.
But you were so enthusiastic.
I think the way that we met was that I wrote a counter review to your review of Citrus the anime, which, I mean, talk about, and I still defend it as, look, it is a crazy melodrama, but it's fun. It's stupid and fun.
Yeah, there you go. And it's still popular. I mean, Citrus Plus is still going. Running.
Citrus Plus selling, is what, 5 volumes is? Yeah.
I know, right? and it's fine. I mean, the fact that I never liked it doesn't mean that I think that it's somehow inferior. You know what I'm saying? Like there are things that I just don't like and cannot like, but I'm not going to say, oh, you suck for liking it. Although there are some things I've actually said that about too.
I think you said that about Frag Time, and I don't disagree with you.
I think I said it for Candy Boy first. That's always fun.
Oh, yep.
Yeah, that was a good one. Lots of hate mail. So what do you think?
Who's defending Candy Boy? It's wild.
People loved it. People loved Candy Boy. For those of you who don't know these things I'll put the names of all the series in the show notes. I'll put links to my reviews so you can read how I felt about it, and you can always look up Nicki's reviews of these things too. But anyway, so let's talk about Yuri fandom, since we are sort of two linchpins in it. How has Yuri fandom grown internationally, especially with the rise of, as you were saying, like GL webcomics?
So I think it's so different now, in that it's not that, there wasn't international Yuri fandom before, but a lot of it, I think, was just, small pockets being interested in, oh, here's this series coming from Japan. Now we see creators from all over, which I know you sort of started with ALC back in 2003 or so, but you have Filipino creators. Tokyo Pop put out some manga from a Spanish creator, Alter Ego, and series, which was Ana Sanchez, which I thought was wonderful. I mean, and
there's a sequel coming.
Yes,
so
Alter Ego
I'm looking forward to that. The sequel of the
I'm so excited about that.
Yes.
And visual novels, especially, there's Studio Lan in America. There's, I'm trying to remember other studios, but there's so many international creators that have come in and then brought their own audience in. So that, I think, is one of the biggest difference. And with that, we see a lot of, talking about the tropes and moving away from them. A lot of the people coming in don't have that. They're not leaning on the tropes of Japanese Yuri as much. Not to say that we don't ever see them, but they're putting in their own twists and themes. I mean, you have Goodly Kuru, Mage and Demon Queen is.
I was just thinking, and that one is so popular. It's so influential, and she's just bringing gamer culture. So it's not like it's, instead of relying on the early 20th century girls' schools that are religious based, which is sort of the tropiest trope of shoujo manga.
Oh my God.
Yuri. And therefore very embedded in Japanese Yuri. You have her just really heavily leaning on gamer culture.
Games.
And so there's none of that. So she's free to do pretty much whatever she wants.
Yeah. And I think that's also become somewhat reflected in a lot of Japanese Yuri works. I think, well, first you have a lot of them embracing that vertical scrolling comic webtoon style format. I know, like Bloomington, for example, was released as a webtoon style, just edited the panels, which I thought was great.
Shifting towards that and online for Bookwalker. They've got some original content, Yuri content, that is a vertical scroll as well.
Yes, what Lily's is on there,
which wasn't bad, and that one was very
shoujo
Yuri.
Yeah,
it was
Yeah, it was
rooted in
very
that.
grounded in that. And I think it also, one of the biggest changes is that you have an audience that doesn't necessarily have that context of, Yuri history, because they didn't grow up with it, which isn't a bad thing. And they aren't getting it because they're not connecting with that aspect of Yuri as much. They're not seeing all the shoujo Yuri series because they're out there reading Mage and Demon Queen or Prism, or no, that's a bad example.
Yeah. Like Not So Shoujo Story, which was a great webcomic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my
and
gosh.
that was a fun comic. I thought that one
That
was
is a fun comic.
very well done. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I think brings in, again, a new audience. It's just that Mage and Demon Queen is so massively influential. And when you have a huge audience and a huge platform, it changes the expectations of an audience, which is like why Kadokawa is now shifting towards vertical scroll. Web comics just became that popular.
Yeah,
and web
absolutely.
comics made such a huge impact. Oh, another one would be Almost Human by Ari North.
Oh my
That'd be
gosh,
another
yes.
webcomic.
Which the second print edition of that, I think, comes out in like, from when we're filming this, in a couple days. So definitely, like, it's a must read. It's one of the few series I've ever been like, yes, 10
Beautiful.
out of 10.
Absolutely stunning,
absolute,
and it was so
beautiful
suited
artwork,
for the
great
webcomic because you
story.
just had Ari had all the space to just do tons of color work, and it was just gorgeous.
It's yeah, I have an interview with her from when the first volume was, the print edition was released, which was by, I think it was Little Bee Publishing and Glad, actually. So it was really great to talk to her about her process and inspiration. But again, there we have a work that shifts out of the tropes and to pull it right. And so to pull it away from these GL Yuri web comics, sometimes I get people getting mad at me when I call them Yuri, for a variety of reasons. One, they're like, oh, you have the whole Yuri is sexual, inappropriate.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know how I felt about that over the years. And I mean, I could see GL is going to win in the end because publishers, but I do think, I feel like GL is the publisher's term, and I think Yuri is the fandom term.
Well, and that the other complaint again, it's like, oh, Yuri is a Japanese term, and well, so is GL.
Yeah, GL is, and by is Chinese, and it's the same word. So Lily is the term, really. I mean, if we take China and Japan together, which would be massive quantities, but also then there's, I want to talk real quick about the international fandom of Thai GL, because we're actually going to have a panel specifically about that with two very exciting guests. And that is so massive right now. That's just like, it took off. And we just
and again, I think some that came, Gap. And there was also, I think, some web comics that came out of that space, if I'm not mistaken. I'm struggling to remember titles now.
I know that's always hard in the middle of a panel. You're like, wait, no, I had that a second ago. But
was Ratana Satis,
Ratana Satis.
Yeah.
So
a lot of her
Beast Knights and a bunch of other stuff. There was just Pulse came out from Seven Seas, so that's a good one.
Oh yeah, the Seven Seas is re-releasing that.
That's an interesting story. It's one of her early stories, and I found it very problematic for a number of reasons in terms of, say, I don't know, professional ethics.
Yeah, sure. That's one of those series similar to Citrus, where I say you can't read it as reality. You have to look at it as a complete work of turn your brain off fiction.
It's a soap opera. Like, watch it the way you watched General Hospital, although none of you probably remember General Hospital because it was so old. I'm dating myself now. Like, as the world turns, it was like when I was a child, my mom was watching all these incredibly unethical behavioral soap operas where they were supposed to be in a hospital and the doctors boffing every third patient and two nurses, and you're like, you can't watch that with your brain intact.
So, and then speaking, a lot of her work obviously had more sexual elements to it. I wouldn't say, oh, it was pornographic, but it had explicit content wrapped up in a drama story.
Right.
And again, I think that's not something, we certainly had that in Japan, but it was different. You wouldn't have a lot of, I think, Yuri work sort of denied characters their sexuality.
Right. Because of the whole, either it was a first love or it's in the, I mean, if we acknowledge that the whole point of being in a private school was that it's a cocoon,
Yeah.
you know, and that you're
That Yuri
protected
until
here and
marriage,
safe
until graduation.
until graduation. You're exactly Yuri until graduation. But then you have something like Yuriko Hara's Mayu Mato Cocoon Entwined, which is like really deeply, like just really leaning heavily into all of that. And I just finished the 6th volume, the final volume of that. And it's a fantastic, I think we can put a period on it. Like we're done now. Like this is done.
Yes.
And it really kind of goes, okay, we need to move as people, as humans, we can move on. That stuff is important, but that's not where it's all going to be forever and ever and ever, you know. So international fandom, I think, has really broadened the expectations
Yes.
of fans.
I talk about genre diversification in that Yuri, really in the mid to late 2010s, when you had partially that big influx of international fandom. But then also, I think a lot of Japanese creators, you know, pushing out, we of course, Kabi Nagata, you know, bringing that autobiographical story and her, which, you know, to call her work Yuri, I think she herself said once, you know, it's neither here nor there. It's some people
she's
do
queer,
right.
but that her work really isn't, except for when it is.
Yes, the focus of the story is not on her relationship with other women. It's on her relationship with herself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's entirely what her story is about. And I think that's why they were so popular. The comic essay form has always been popular in Japan, but she really broke out into an international, again, an international view. And I think that just changes things, you know, and all of a sudden the world is talking to you.
There's more lesbian and more LGBTQ creators doing that. I mean, we have X-Gender, the girl that can't get a girlfriend. You know, a lot of, I realized, or some, I'm trying to remember the title. I didn't realize my gender until I was 30. You know, we have queer creators bringing out these different works after her. And then the internet also, I think, was a big change and revolution in that if you don't have, you know, Kabi Nagata, her work was originally online. If you don't have to go through a publisher, you don't have someone saying, oh, you know, here's the status quo, here's what we want to see.
This is what I think will sell. You should change it this way, because editors in Japan have a lot of power, and you can sometimes see that maybe they don't understand the story because you have a good idea, and then all of a sudden something else, and you're like, that's not so good anymore. And there's the other way around too, where that first chapter has potential, but you're like, what is this about? And then like 3 chapters later, you're like, oh, okay, that's actually a good story. You know, so they took time to figure it out.
So many of kind of this next generation of Yuri, the, you know, new Yuri post 2020 and a little bit before that, where we have I'm in love with the villainess, or Asexuality, which was very much an underrated. That whole era, I think, started online, and it shifted, and a lot of new works that wouldn't necessarily have fit into the rigid style of Yuri before. I mean, we would never have gotten Roll Over and Die in 2012.
No, you're right. And I think not only did the internet change that, again, it goes back to that international. I'm just going to bring that back because specifically with I'm in Love with the Villainess, it actually was acquired and published in countries here
before Japan
and other countries before it was in print in Japan. And then it was the popularity of it elsewhere that, you know, that kind of interested Japanese publisher. And so now we have this whole thing where it's like she had finished it as an online novel, not as she started as a web novel and finished it as a digital novel, and then it got acquired by Japan, so they can't really change much. So that story that was acquired by Ichijinsha was super openly queer, gets queerer as it goes along, and that's not the kind of thing they have traditionally published as novels, because a lot of their novels over the years, and this is where my age comes through, I read a lot of their original novels, the Yuri novels, and they were terrible because they were like just ever so barely this thin scraping of Yuri over a shitty story. And you know, now you have something that's so openly queer, and it's because the international popularity made the publisher in Japan.
I know you did an interview with her, with Inori Sensei, didn't you? Where she
Yes.
talked about, the Korean and American fandom for that series really helped it to take off.
Yeah, I'm actually going to do a panel with her. We were supposed to be
Oh,
scheduled,
yay.
but when I was sick, so I'm hoping to do that. Later
Yeah,
this
no,
year.
I'm excited to see that.
Yeah. She's just so cool. She's just such a cool person. Also, she's having health issues too. Between the two of us, like she has them and then I have them and she has them. It's ridiculous. Because like middle-aged women, yay.
Oh my gosh.
So what do you think? I'd like to hear your perspective on what changes have you personally seen since you started as a Yuri journalist?
So I'm going to take away the international scene, focus on America. So I already talked about, we have more non-Japanese work being published. Another big change is here licensing. When I first started, there was ALC, of course, had a few books out, and then Seven Seas, I can't remember what they called it, the Strawberry Line or
Strawberry
whatever.
Line, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then they licensed in, I think it was 2012, Girlfriends, which I bought as soon as it was released. We were getting one manga a year, if that.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, all at once, late 2010s, it is every single publisher. You have Kodansha does Here Is My Job, Yen Press has, Eclair, and
she loves to cook, she loves to eat, which I want to talk about as a separate
yes.
topic.
Oh
Let's
my
talk
gosh.
about that as a separate topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, Viz goes and licenses
what did Viz do?
Miuri Hironashi's Patreon as a book. So we have this wonderful story, girl who can't get a girlfriend, which began like the butch girl who can't get a girlfriend. And so that's that's an amazing thing that Viz goes and like reaches past traditional publishing.
Yeah, it goes directly to a creator to be like, we want to put your story out there.
Yep.
As an original.
It's a wonderful story, yes.
It is a great story, really, really fun manga.
Very, very moving. Very moving.
Yeah. And super funny. Oh, she's hysterical.
And the thing is, if I said when I reviewed it that if somebody wants to know about like memeing culture in 2021, like that would be the book to read, because she is like brilliant on her memes. But like, how memes are like now, somebody says, I don't know, I have a tweet from a very famous writer saying, if somebody sends me another surprise cake, I'm going to eat them. And I thought there's a sentence that didn't make sense last year and it won't make sense next year. But for this one period of time, this is a very funny line.
Yeah. It's wonderful. So, I mean, and not just, licensing current series, but they're going back. A moment that was revolutionary for me was when The Conditions of Paradise was licensed, because that was published in, I can't remember the exact date in Japan, but maybe 2013, could have been earlier. And it was talk about, a revolutionary work that was against tropes. It was kind of one of the first Shikaijin series we have, one of the first, it's an anthology, of course, but there's some of the main stories are about adult characters who identify as lesbians living in a realistic world, not in some secluded school where they're speaking French half the time. And
the series on that one too was those stories are a bit of an offshoot from another series which hasn't been licensed about women who work at a wedding mill, wedding place where you get your wedding dresses and they design your weddings. I don't know what you would call that, but they that story was also revolutionary because it was running in comic Yuri Hime, when it split to Yuri Hime S and Yuri Hime.
Oh yeah, this was like the
middle thousands into the early 2010, and it was running in this magazine, and it was one of the very first. It wasn't the first, but it was one of the few manga at the time in Yuri Hime that actually talked about being lesbian. We had people acknowledging that there was, the family, and then those people, the normies, and it was the Kochi no Ke, Sochi no Ke thing. And I loved that story. It was about adults and it was about women who knew that they actually loved women. And it went for 3 volumes total, and then had some side stories, which became Conditions of Paradise. I'm sorry, the rest of them haven't been licensed, but they will be so dated when they are, because they're so rooted in that 2000s, mid 2000s culture. So people will be like, I don't get any of these jokes. Like, I don't get this.
There are certain works that I think can never be licensed. So every now and then someone thinks, oh, do you think Maria Watches Over Us will ever be licensed? No,
No,
absolutely not.
no, no.
It would make zero sense to anyone because it's so deep and rooted into, the time and Yuri culture, and also it would not sell at all.
Well, yeah, Maria Samagamitru also has other issues.
Yeah.
It got licensed in Germany and didn't do well because they didn't really
No, it did
sell it
not.
very well. The light novels, but the light novels are actually very funny and very modern.
Yes.
And so it's a shame if
I've
they
only read
won't
the
actually
first one
get over
because
here.
reading in Japanese takes me a long time.
Right.
But yeah, I'll agree with
Me
that.
too. But the anime actually is on High Dive. So if you want to
Yes.
experience it, you can experience all 4 seasons. And I think the anime did a really good job. I mean, it cut out tons of, stuff, but
Yeah.
and none of the actually really gay stuff. There's one gay scene and that's about it.
Yeah, I think that they cut out a lot of the queerness from that
well, I mean,
story.
the series wasn't really about that, except for there's a scene later on in one of the later novels where Shizuka is really, really gay for like an entire story.
I'll have to go and
that
find
was
that
like the
one.
gayest story.
So I totally lost track, but I love, and then we had recently Quality of the Purple, which I think was really the first good Yuri sci-fi story.
Okay.
So seeing all those works get licensed.
Well, then there's Other Side Picnic too.
Yuri Boom, Other Side Picnic, yeah, and Last and First Idol. I kind of
that one to me was outstanding. That was dark as
it
was.
So Sam sent me the guy who runs J Novel Club, sent me that with a bunch of other Yuri works, didn't tell me at all what it was. And I read it on an airplane, going in blind. Horrific, because it's, existentialism and body horror and all this terrible stuff. And I'm like, this was a Nico Maki fanfic?
Yeah, right. But it was good, right?
It was so good.
I spoke to him and he gave it to me. I think we were in Canada and the Animathon. And he's like, oh, read it. And I'm like, okay. And I'm reading it and I'm like, wow, this is the darkest shit I've ever read. But it was so well written that I really couldn't stop reading it. And so I'm careful about who I suggest it to, but we are getting Hayakawa Publishing is investing in particularly sci-fi. So we have Japanese sci-fi Yuri collections,
which I adore so much. And I've written a few articles about, sci-fi Yuri because it's such an exciting place. I think Genkan Kusano and Iori Miyazawa, I might have mispronounced those names, who do Other Side Picnic, Last First Idol, are so, they're both incredible authors, but they think about Yuri in such a unique way, and an interesting way.
Yeah.
I think Miyazawa, of course, has his sort of semi-famous Yuri May Be Human talk that he gave, where he talks about these different theories of Yuri and Yuri of absence, of, if you look at a chair or a bench, can you make that into some sort of Yuri scene in your mind with emotion? Really interesting and crazy stuff that I don't think fandom culture would have latched onto or been able to hear or come up with 10 years ago.
Or 20 years ago. Yeah. For me, it's very interesting because science fiction was one of the first places that lesbian literature landed.
Yes.
It eventually sort of really took root in like mystery and detective stuff, but really in the early 70s, you had a ton of science fiction because, of course, once you leave this society, remake society, change society, leave the planet, you can do whatever you want. So that was kind of where early lesbian fiction and literature was kind of always going. So for me, it's sort of like this was the natural place for Yuri literature to really start to grow, and we'll start seeing other stuff from there,
Yeah.
And I'm still waiting for the Yuri action stuff because we need more of that.
I think we're starting to see some of that in light novels and a little bit in manga. We have SHWD, which was very, very fun.
I love it.
Both the digital manga ink has the original Dojin, and Seven Seas has the full manga.
Yes, I have the original Dojin. I have the original Dojin.
Yes.
In fact, I was there at Comic-Con when they launched the series.
It was so wonderful series. Love the character designs, especially.
Yeah. That one's great because of the women are large. They're beefy.
Yes.
They're big women, and they're not necessarily. Not fat, it's not about. It's not about that they're large. They just are very large.
They just. I sent OG, who runs Yuri Empire blog, some screenshots of just you know, here's some muscular women in a Yuri story. He was over the moon about it. He was
Yeah.
like, yes,
I like
finally.
muscular, they're really muscular.
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought that was fun. But
I
also I love the fact
love
that the largest woman is actually extremely
She's
feminine.
the most feminine, the most tender of them, you know,
And she's
in
a
that
sweet
traditional
character.
role.
I mean, she's just a
Mhm.
lovable character, you know.
Yeah.
I think
Um,
I think we'll see more, of course, because what's happened is people who are creating Yuri all over the world, whatever we call it, are growing up with that. Now they're, you know, you grew up, there's a whole generation that grew up after you, and it's like, it's just a thing, right? That just
Mhm.
exists, right? So what's interesting
Yes.
to me is I've been reading a little of Bai He, and the Chinese stories tend to be, you know, like Don May is sort of the ancient, you know, imperial culture. And I think
Yeah.
that's very funny because that's so much of their popular culture literature is sort of rooted in that. And I'm looking forward to that, you know, being left behind and people doing new and exciting work. But I think it's also very safe to do those old tropes.
Yeah. I mean, it sells well. I'm Seven
So,
Seas is killing it with their Dunmay right now.
yeah, exactly. I mean,
Um,
and you know, I get it.
yeah,
I get why it's popular, and I'm looking forward.
sure.
I'm hoping they'll bring over some Bai He as well. So I would say got to be one of the biggest changes that we've both seen is how much queerer Yuri is.
Yeah. I was
Right?
just about to go there. So
Yeah.
I think, and I know you've talked about this, Yuri and Queerness had such a separation.
Mhm.
It's not to say that Yuri wasn't queer, but it was elements of queerness. It was like little
Yeah, they're like
touches of it.
parallel tracks almost for a long
Yes.
time.
You know, there were not a lot of the characters in Yuri's stories were not lesbians.
Right.
And that is so, you know, even the word lesbian, I still get excited when I'm reading a manga and I see characters talk about lesbians or
Yeah, I
straight
agree.
people. I read
Or queer or anything,
or
you know,
queerness, yes.
and they're saying it's that shift over to identity, right? That's my
Mhm.
joke on Okazu's that Yuri is anything without lesbian identity. It's it's lesbian content without
Lesbian
lesbian
content without
identity.
lesbian
Because then it
identity.
changes,
Yes.
right? Right.
Mhm. Yeah, certainly. And that I don't think that we can fairly say Yuri is now queer, but I think there's a lot more Yuri that embraces that
Mhm.
lesbian identity, you know, whether it's a story that really focuses on it, like I'm in love with the villainesses, so much of it is about queerness. But then we have other works, you know, I Can't Believe I Slept With You, which Seven
Mhm.
Seas put out, where the landlord character in that is a lesbian and you know, there's one of my favorite panels is that she just looks depressed and says, you know, this damn straight girl or
Mhm.
something.
Mhm.
And
Or Yuri is
I
my
relate to
job.
that so much.
Right. Or Yuri is
Right.
my job, where you have
Yuri,
Nene
oh yes.
wandering through this Yuri cafe of straight girls, like, you know, constantly with a headache because they're
Mhm.
making her crazy, you know, and
Yeah.
you know, and she even
SciFi
says
and
to
Bloomington,
something.
those light novels, you know, she has a very much a lesbian journey,
Mhm.
you know, from the first novel where she sort of realizes that she's in love with women and that she loves women to getting a girlfriend. Those are really queer stories,
Right.
you know, through and through. And I think that has to be the biggest change overall. And I think audiences both expect that and it's, I don't want to say rejected. So something interesting is that I really love when a story does focus on queerness and it talks about, you know, here are the struggles or that I face a queer person, or here's a real issue. I think a very common one that we're seeing a lot of is marriage equality often gets brought up, you know, in the fact that in Japan, there isn't the same
Mhm.
marriage equality.
Even though the Supreme Court has repeatedly said there needs to be, and the government just
Yeah,
basically says, yes, we will definitely do something about that one day.
absolutely. Yeah. And I obviously I'm not one to really comment on that. I'm not Japanese and I don't know that side of it as well. But, and then I think talking about the younger fandom, especially on TikTok, a lot of people say, oh, I don't really like stories like that. I want ones where the characters are doing something else, but just are lesbians.
Kind of
And
throwback.
right. And I'm thinking, I don't know if Yuri's at that point yet because it's spent so long having characters in those kind of stories that really weren't
That we
lesbians.
rejected it, that the creators are of our
Right.
age are rejecting that and going, no, we're going to have, and I'm going to talk about it. She loves to cook, she loves to eat.
Yes.
Where we have characters going, adult characters realizing that they
Mhm.
are in fact lesbian.
Yeah.
You know, that they're asexual lesbians and that they have
Mhm.
always felt this way, and they had no words for it. Now they have words for it and they can talk about it, and they have people to whom they can talk about it, which is really the point of the story about an alternate family, like developing with people who care about each other and can support each other.
Yeah.
But
I
that to
think
me is so critical a change. Like it's amazing and wonderful.
it's wonderful. So, speaking of asexuality, there's a number of works, and I recently wrote an article
Yeah, you did.
focusing on them. You have She Loves to Cook, She Loves to Eat, Catch These Hands, which
Right.
Yen Press puts out in English. There's an Italian artist who has a webtoon, I'm trying to remember the name, Kiss It Goodbye, where you have characters who are asexual and are lesbians in a relationship, but their asexuality is a point of it. And it's sort of, for me, reframes some of the old by your side, tropes of like, oh, we're together, but there's no sexuality, or there's a denial of their sexuality. To no, it's embracing that they are asexual.
Right.
It's
That
them
the
navigating a
intimacy, and
new
I've been writing
relationship
stuff
together,
about
intimacy.
I've been writing stuff about emotional intimacy a lot.
Yes.
And that's, to me, it's like we've moved away from physical romance or sexual relationships as Yuri to sort of emotional intimacy as being sort of the new Yuri, which as I'm getting older is much more appealing to me.
Sure.
And I can imagine that a younger, hornier audience is like, give me the sex,
I think a nice mixture of both. And there, I think there's definitely a place for amazing stories like Donuts Under a Crust and Words, all about the emotional intimacy. But I think you can also have the stories where there's both a physical intimacy and emotional intimacy. I think I'm in Love with the Villainess, to keep going back, that does it beautifully, where you have characters who are very physically attracted to each other and express that and show that, but they also, they love each other as people. They get married, they start a family. There is that emotional side of it.
Yes, I agree entirely. So now that we've talked about some of the things that have changed, what trends are you most positive about as Yuri moves forward?
I'm most positive about Yuri science fiction is definitely one of them, because I really love the stuff that's coming out of that space. I'm positive to see us moving away from some of the shoujo-esque school class S stories. I think that they still certainly exist and they have a place. I think Whisper Me a Love Song, which I love, it still draws on a lot of that, but we have a lot more stories that are not just, this high school idyllic dream, lilies everywhere romance, that are doing something a little more different, a little more grounded. Shikaijin Yuri, or any Yuri with really adults in real world situations, whether that's an office or a cohabitation, two people living together or creating a life together. I really enjoy those kind of stories, and I think we're seeing a lot more of those. And I'm excited to keep seeing more of them.
Yeah, I agree. I do think Whisper a Love Song does something really important, which is it's completely G-rated. And
Yes.
it's really nice to
I have it in my
that I could
classroom.
hand off to a tween and say,
Yep.
you can read this, and it won't, there's nothing in here
Yes,
that you should be afraid of.
I have it in my 6th grade classroom. I have, a shelf of LGBTQ books, and it's one of the few manga that I have, because I can't in good faith put, Our Dreams at Dusk or even Bloomington, because that has some more adult content at the end there, but I can
But also,
take...
there's such a gap between middle school and high school, right?
Yes.
Such a huge gap. You are a child in middle school. And by the time you get to high school, you're sort of struggling with those adult concepts, even if you don't necessarily have adult thoughts about them. And so, you can't give Bloomington to it. Like all the stuff about the play would lose any 11-year-old. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's the best part of the story.
Oh, it's such an interesting part. I'm so glad that was in the anime.
Me too.
And that's where they chose to cut it off.
Yep.
I think that the place where Bloomington starts to get good.
Yep, I agree, 100%. All right, let's finish up with one more question. What do you think the future holds for Yuri?
Lesbians.
Yeah, baby.
I really think that Yuri is going to become, and whether that's Yuri or it changes in, we start calling it GL, or okay, I'm not a big fan, but I think the queerness is going to continue to rise. I think the authorship and audience, which has always been really diverse, you know, Yuri's never been for by any one group. I think that's going to continue to grow. I'd love to see, and we're starting to see really this year, more Yuri anime. I think anime is lagged behind. And we're, you know, we have G-Witch, Yuri is my job. I'm in love with the villainess. I'm so
And
excited
Birdie
for that.
Yep. We finally have
Birdie
a real
Wing.
Yuri sports series. I
We
mean,
have a Yuri sports series.
that
That
was
was your
like
dream
my
for a long
dream, and it
time.
was so perfect. It was so completely
Oh, and what
out of the
a great
box.
one to have.
What a great one to have. So yeah, I think the future is very bright for Yuri, and I agree 100% with everything you've said. And I think
Yeah.
that science fiction is a terrific proving ground for new concepts and new ideas. And I think we'll see some very interesting stuff coming out of that. Oh, I can't remember the title now. Cyclone Twister. It was something like Psychotropic Cyclone Twister or something. It is a short Yuri science fiction that's actually getting a manga, and I can totally see they're heading towards wanting it as an anime because it's sort of a action and, you know, speed and whatever else series. So yeah, I think we're going to get a lot more of that. A lot less. I can't make friends and this girl makes me feel good and then I'm, you know, we live happily ever after. I think we're getting more of like things that we're doing together.
Yes, things that we're doing together, and also we're queer.
Yes, that too.
I'm
Excellent.
excited to see that.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. This was incredibly fun, and we should do this more often without the recording.
I'm so excited to see you and talk to you. I'm glad to know that you're doing better and that we're both continuing to talk about Yuri and explore it and see it grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I'll see you again next time on Yuri Studio.